Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If we haven't met before, my name is Liku and this is Liku's Library. As I said in my previous video, I love books from various genres and it really bounces from all over the place. Anti-racism, social science, nonfiction, fantasy romance, self-help, whatever you're feeling. So hopefully there's a book in here for you based on whatever genre you like. Definitely read the trigger warnings for all of these before you read them. I want to start off on more of a disturbing read. I'm just kind of getting into thriller, more of that definitely coming in 2024, but one that I seriously enjoyed that I wasn't really expecting to was We Had to Remove This Post. Super disturbing, super chilling, very, very fast paced. It's a shorter book and I listened to it in an audiobook format while on a walk, and there were several times where I literally stopped walking and I was like, oh, oh my god. What the did I just read? And this story really focuses around content moderation with the main character who's previously left this job and is now telling a lawyer that is representing their coworkers in a class action against the corporation for horrible work conditions. It also goes down like a very interesting conspiracy rabbit hole that I was just like not expecting, but kind of makes sense given like the theme of their work. If you're looking for more like, I wouldn't necessarily call it psychological thriller, but more of a disturbing-esque, definitely pick it up. Killing the Black Body, Race, Reproduction, and the Meaning of Black Liberty by Dorothy Roberts was another 5-star book for me. I also listened to this in audiobook format, and I feel like I learned a lot. This is a nonfiction social science anti-racism book that gives you a lot of the background of when Black people have been exploited and forcibly sterilized. I love this book, but it was also gut-wrenching. I feel like when you read a fiction or a fantasy book, it's like, oh, that horrible thing might have happened to that character, but like I'm kind of soothed because at the end of the day, it's just a character versus real life people and like actually what has happened to them and how it's impacted not only them and their community, but also like their lineage and their family and what it means for them to not receive any kind of compensation or apology for it and what systemic violence looks like in a reproductive sense. It's been on my TBR for several years, so I'm so glad I was finally able to read it this year. It is going to be recommended for those of you subscribed on Patreon, which I will link down below. It's going to be in our next reading list. My next 5-star read is Angela Davis's Freedom is a Constant Struggle. Very, very popular book right now. Ferguson, Palestine, and the Foundations of a Movement. This is another nonfiction, social science, anti-racism book where Davis does a great job of explaining the links between various militarized, violent governments from around the world, specifically focusing on the US and Israeli governments, which chef's kiss. Personally, I feel like if you haven't picked up an Angela Davis book before, this is a really good one that also gives you a lot of education on what's happening in the world right now and leaves you feeling like a lot more competent to talk about these issues with your loved ones. I also previously read Angela Davis's Women, Race, and Class, and we read that in book club together. I found very similar to Fearing the Black Body, and Davis in that book specifically goes through the atrocities of what it was like for women during enslavement and what it has meant for Black women trying to fight for their liberation and freedom, specifically the intersection of Black people and women, because they're often left out of conversations around Black liberation and also left out of like modern feminism. However, a lot of the examples that she uses is sinfully explicit to read, so there were several times during Women, Race, and Class where I had to stop and pause and be like, okay, I need a minute. The first time I read it, I straight up cried. Special trigger warning, especially for those of you that are also descended from enslaved folks like myself. It was brutal. I also think extremely necessary and like very, very culturally relevant. My next 5-star reads is We Do This, We Free Us by Miriam Kaba. This is like an abolitionist 101 beginner. We are reading this month actually in book club for January and February, and if you're interested in joining book club, I will leave a link down below. We meet once a month via Zoom, very chill, and we are at a pace of 1 book every 2 months, so we're set to read 6 books together this year. In it, Miriam Kaba talks about a lot of the misconceptions around abolition and the importance of prioritizing marginalized voices in the forefront of abolitionist movements. I also feel like she gives really good bite-sized pieces. One quote that really sticks out to me: hope is a discipline. And the reminder that like having hope is an intentional choice. It's not just like a feeling that comes and goes. Even in the darkest days, all is not lost. One of the best books I read this year, Midnight Library by Matt Haig, and I might be saying that wrong, H-A-I-G. Midnight Library has been very thoroughly talked about already across BookTube, BookTok, Bookstagram, anywhere you can put book in front of. I think for good reason. I feel like I read the reviews on Goodreads and it's hit or miss. Some people really love it, some people really don't. I personally was a big fan, but also I can understand where people maybe weren't such big fans. It's really good as a fiction book, but some people were critiquing it by saying it has been framed as a self-help book or started feeling like self-helpy. Midnight Library is a very beautiful fiction book, but it's also like a large larger take on life. Not to get too deep, like me personally in my own life, I always say that I do not have regrets in my life because every decision I've made has led me to this moment here, and whether I'm happy with that or not, it was still necessary. It's like a canon event for the plot that is my life, and I feel like Midnight Library touches on that topic extremely well. The main character is not happy with her life and she ends it, or attempts to end it, and is left in this like kind of purgatory place called Midnight Library where her watch is stuck at midnight and it doesn't move, and the shelves in this library are all the different lives she could have lived had she made different choices. I thought Midnight Library was very, very beautifully written. I also really liked this book because it was very like visual, so for me to be able to read the audiobook and still have a visualization of what this world looked like, I think just speaks to how good the writing is. Definitely pick it up. Bitter by Akwaeke Emezi. This is 0.5. In timeline order, it comes before Pet by Akwaeke Emezi, which is one of my favorite books of all time. I think it's amazing, and I definitely reread it this year. Also give it 5 stars. So read that one first, and then you better understand Bitter, but Bitter was written after Pet, if that makes sense. Yeah, if you are familiar with Pet, Pet is essentially an abolitionist fiction, which is, we need more. We need more abolition. Where was this when I was a child? It's a YA, but I personally don't recommend it to people under 18, but again, that's totally up to you. In it, we're essentially in this town or city called Lucille, which is post-revolution, and they have supposedly gotten rid of all bad things like systemic inequality and different things that cause harm to marginalized people in society. Our main character is a Black trans girl who's neurodivergent named Jam. What I really like about Emezi is they have such a diverse list of characters. They very beautifully and very seamlessly bring diversity into the book without it being a main plot line. There's so many other things that are like more interesting about that character rather than the fact that they're Black, or rather than the fact that they're trans or neurodivergent. And no shade to authors that do, because I also appreciate those, but I think that we need more fiction books where the protagonist is a Black trans girl. The whole book isn't just focused around the trauma of her being a Black trans girl. You know what I mean? Bitter is about Jam's mom when she was Jam's age, pre-revolution. So you have to read Pet in order to better understand Bitter and understand like the characters that are involved. There is crossover.
That's all I'm gonna say.
I'm definitely gonna reread it this year because I feel like I read it not too quickly, but I just didn't appreciate it enough, and now that I've reread Pet 4 times, I can really appreciate Bitter that much more. Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia by Sabrina Strings. Definitely the best book I read this year by far. There's a lot of pictures in the book, but my biggest tip is if you're going to read this book, you need to look up the pictures that Spring has included in the book of like paintings, statues. They talk about paintings in the Renaissance time that depict Black people and specifically like slaves that were in Europe at the time and seen as like a sign of wealth to have like a small Black child. Oh hell no! However, the book is in black and white, and it's definitely one of the more expensive books I've bought at like in the $50 to $60-ish range, and I personally think that it's in black and white because if they would have printed it in color, it would have been that much more expensive. So my only caveat is if you're going to read this book, you need to look up all the paintings, all the statues, whatever photo references there are in color, because the way that they painted Black people hundreds of years ago, not the best. And it definitely doesn't translate well to black and white. It's just kind of like a smudge. It's really hard to see. Even when you look it up in color, it can be a little difficult to see what, like, fully understand what you're looking at. However, you're gonna have a much better time doing so in color. Personally, I don't love reading like academic heavy style books because it reminds me of when I was in school and had to read, and I'm not a fan of that, but also it's really inaccessible. And I was taken out of the learning aspect that I really love about nonfiction because I had to spend so much time looking up what different words mean. Who is this painter? I'm not super into like Renaissance painting. That's not my vibe at all. It took me, I think, 2 months to get through it, and that's longer than it takes me for most books around that size. I want to say it's around like the 500 page-ish mark. So just keep in mind giving yourself lots of time to do it. It is a book we're reading in book club this year, which I'm really excited to go through it together because it's very relevant. It talks about how fat phobia has only been made possible by white supremacy, but we've been knowing that, so like, let's pretend to be shocked together, shall we? Strings does a really, really great job of explaining the idea of racial superiority was not only by skin tone, but also by body type. On a lighter note, I read Emily Henry's Happy Place this year and loved it. I thought it was so cute. This is the issue with Emily Henry books for me personally, and keep in mind, I still gave it 5 stars. I still love the book. I don't feel like enough time is spent in her books around character development. Personally, and if you disagree, that's completely fine. I prefer more character development, so I don't remember any of the characters' names. By the time I was like halfway through the book, I had to flip back to the beginning of the book and be like, who is this again? Is this because I have a horrible memory? Maybe, and maybe that's why I prefer more character development, because it gives me a little more grit and like a little something to like latch onto to like remind myself of which character does what and what are they into. But it was just a very good beach read. It's like a romance, very chill book. I thought it was so sweet. I also think that the romance genre just gets a lot of hate because it's something that women overall tend to love a lot more.
And that's a deeper conversation about misogyny that we can have about books another day.
There hasn't been a single Emily Henry book that I haven't enjoyed and given like 4 or 5 stars. In between all of these really heavy books that I read like a romance or like a smut fantasy book. It keeps me sane. So do what you gotta. That's why we're all over the place with what these are. The next book is by Melissa Urban, Book of Boundaries. This is my most recommended book of 2023. The reason that I love this book so much is because Melissa Urban does a great job of explaining green boundaries, yellow boundaries, red boundaries, and think of it as like a stoplight. So a lot of other boundary books talk about boundaries and recommend setting boundaries and maintaining boundaries categorized by relationship. So like, this is the boundaries you should have with your parents. This is like a healthy relationship boundary, friendship boundary, work boundary. Like, there isn't a one size fits all for relationships. What I like about Melissa Urban is she frames it in like how strict you want to be with your boundary setting. And you can interchange them depending on the conversation you're in. You can change them multiple times with the people that you're around, who you're talking to, and that way it's not categorized by relationship, but it's categorized rather by your like comfort level and what you would prefer the outcome of this conversation to be. And she gives multiple examples for different scenarios given the green, yellow / orange and red boundaries, and I love that. So if you are like me and are a recovering people pleaser, pick up the book. Pick it up, babe. Then there's 101 Essays That Will Change the Way You Think by Brianna West. I'm just gonna leave it at what I wrote for my Goodreads review. I read the book, ... but the book really read me. We'll come back time and time again, I'm sure. And that was it for my 5-star reads for 2023. Now we're going to talk about the TBRs for 2024. I want to talk about some anticipated releases that are coming out this year. Of course, we're going to start with Emily Henry's book, which is called Funny Story. I have no idea what it's about. I love going into romance books and like fiction books or fantasy books knowing nothing. I want to go in surprised, shocked, bamboozled. So I've watched a few booktubers who have talked about this anticipated release. They've broken down like the cover, what they think it's going to be about, and I think their thoughts are amazing. However, I stopped watching. I don't know. Keep it to yourself. Respectfully and with love, I want to be surprised. I don't want to know. After that, Jennifer L. Armentrout is one of my favorite authors in the fantasy romance genre. This is the 5th book? 5th book. 5th book. Yeah, 5th book. from Blood and Ash series. Now, it was a thickums book. It's like 500 pages. Right behind my head. And then I read From A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire, which is the 2nd book, which in my opinion was kind of like, it's not skippable because the story does like build on itself. It's my least favorite one in the series. The Crown of Gilded Bones, which really hit. From Blood and Ash also was amazing. The War of Two Queens I just finished at the end of this year, so this is my anticipated read. It just came out last July, I want to say, but because I hadn't read the 4th book, I couldn't read the 5th book. We're coming out with another book this year. That is going to be The Primal of Blood and Bone. I don't know if it has a release date or if I just said it was coming out this year. Whenever it comes out, I'll be reading it. This is one of my most anticipated reads for this year. I'm really excited. We left on like a high note on the last book. I'm not going to give any spoilers. It is like a fantasy, romance, smutty. That's why I picked it up. I got hooked into the stories. If you want to talk about it, we can make a whole video just about that series. I read Parable of the Sower, and it's one of the books that we are also reading this year for book club by Octavia E. Butler. Love it. It's a dystopian sci-fi. It was written in 1993, I believe, or the early 90s, but it's set in 2020s. And so it's the perfect book to read right now. Parable of the Sower was really interesting. It follows the main character through like the trials and tribulations of living in a kind of like a post-apocalyptic society. What I really love about it is I wasn't really ever into sci-fi because it just felt like a world that was intentionally created without me and without people that look like me. And so what I love about Parable of the Sower is it very intentionally puts Black women as the main character and like an action. And I was like, oh, this is good. But again, doesn't make her being a Black woman the entire plot. Parable of the Kindred is the next book. I have not read it yet. because I have so many books on my book list, okay? I've not read it yet. I've read Parable of the Sower several times, but one of my favorite authors, Akweke Emezi, actually just announced on their Instagram that they were asked to write the foreword for a new edition of Parable of the Kindred. I'm super excited for it, and I will let you know when I get there. After that, I'm excited to read Black on Both Sides, A Racial History of Trans Identity by C. Riley Snorton. Black on Both Sides identifies multiple intersections between Blackness and transness from the mid-19th century to present-day anti-Black and anti-trans legislation and violence. Drawing on a deep and varied archive of materials, C. Riley Snorton attends to how slavery and the production of racialized gender provides the foundations for an understanding of gender as mutable. I cannot wait! This has been on my TBR list for like a long time. I just have so many books I'm currently reading that I have to wait a minute, but I'm super excited to get to it. I'm currently reading Belly of the Beast by Deshaun L. Harrison. It's very similar to Sabrina String's Fearing the Black Body, which I really love because Sabrina Strings writes the little blurb at the top of the book, like on the cover, and I feel like it's a good introduction into the intersection between fat phobia and anti-Blackness. And then Deshaun L. Harrison, I'm like, I want to say 10 or 20 pages in, and it's around 100-ish pages. Talks about their own experience as a queer fat Black man. I find it's a difficult read. A Little Life. I refuse to read anything about it. I just read the trigger warnings. Like I said, I don't want to know shit. I don't want to know shit about it. I'm also hoping to read Babel. Again, I don't want to know shit about it. I know nothing. Those two books, if you know anything about them, don't put any spoilers below. But please pray for me. From what I understand, they're difficult to get through. And then the very last book that I will leave you with is All the Black Girls Are Activists, A Fourth Wave Womanist Pursuit of Dreams as Radical Resistance by Ebony Janice Moore. I am 30% through it right now. It has been really great so far. I got it as a free audiobook. It just came out in the summer of last year. This had been on my TBR since fall. It's a social science / like commentary on what it means to be Black and experience anti-Blackness as Black women. It's also super accessible, which is like my absolute favorite thing for books around this topic. There's no reason why you should need a degree to read a book, in my opinion. This book was specifically written for Black women, for all Black women, and I am tenderly making my way through it. That is my 5-star reads from 2023 and my most anticipated TBRs for this upcoming year. I know a lot of other TBRs specifically talk about books that they are anticipating releases on, but I personally feel like there's so many great books out there already that don't get their flowers. And no shade to other booktubers, but I prefer nonfiction and read a lot of nonfiction, and I personally feel like I'm not going to be doing like 30 to 40 size book hauls. It's unrealistic. I'm also not super into consuming that amount of books just to have them sit on my shelf. Very much like a library girly, very much an audiobook girly, reading when I can, reading before bed, at least for now. I would love to read more. If you like and subscribe, I will be able to read more. But for real, a lot of the books in this genre need reflection, and you need time to like sit and think about how it's impacted your life and how it will impact your like community going forward. Thank you so much for watching another video. I am looking forward to more videos coming up. I have some like big ideas for this channel, so for those of you that have watched this far, I really appreciate it. If you haven't already, please like, comment, and subscribe. Comment your most anticipated 2024 book and your favorite book from 2023 that you read. Again, my name is Liku. All of my social media handles, and they can all be found in the description below. If you want to be friends on Goodreads, that's in the description below. I'll talk to you next time. Okay, bye.